Do you know that feeling of stepping into a match of Overwatch, whether competitive or casual, and it appears as though you lost already when just looking at the hero choices your team makes? I'd imagine that many of you are all too familiar with that kind of situation. Overwatch is the kind of game where your choice of heroes and hero composition when looking at your entire team can immediately affect how likely you are to win the match. And that obviously comes to nobody's surprise. With the rock paper scissors nature of many of the heroes in which they are simply meant to overpower others, losing based on hero choice is absolutely nothing unusual. And that is just one of the cases where many of us feel like we lost in the hero selection screen already. But why am I bringing this up? Well, for my last upload, I decided to take one of Blizzard's arguments regarding matchmaking balance and simply argued against it using the point of view of an average player and how a big part of the player base perceives these types of issues. And I would like to keep this trend up. While I think calling this an outright attack on their stance regarding game design is a bit of an exaggeration, I do think that some of the things that Blizzard has argued against or in favor of completely neglected player perception. And when I say perception, some of you might be raising your eyebrows, wondering if it is really a problem when it's not an actual issue, but rather one that we perceive to exist. Well, player perception actually affects a lot of things that then turn into very real problems. Here's an example. When the player base is under the perception that stacking with their friends puts them at a disadvantage because the matchmaker presumably gives them stronger opponents, then it doesn't matter whether or not it actually does that very thing. Because the result is that we are going to stop playing with our friends in order to increase our perceived chance to get more elo, and we eventually end up in an environment where team play comes second over trying to maximize your statistics. In a similar fashion to that example, we also got the problem of players feeling like they already lost in the hero selection screen. And for the sake of trying to make you understand why this can potentially be more of a perceived issue than a real one, I'm gonna have to play devil's advocate here. But do not worry, it's eventually gonna come full circle to a statement sides of Blizzard and their stance on the implementation of a certain feature that could alleviate this problem. So let's get this show rolling. Why do players feel like losing in the hero selection screen happens so goddamn often? As we already mentioned in the beginning, the counter-heavy nature of Overwatch. If you have a bunch of teammates who all decide to play very stationary heroes on a map that features a lot of high ground play, then you are going to be objectively at a disadvantage. Nobody likes kicking a competitive match off on a disadvantage, and even in casual play, it can be very frustrating to have to try 5 times harder to make up for a problem that your teammates forced upon you. Now, for the longest time, the player base was under the impression that hero balance was completely dictated by balance patches and the current state of certain heroes in the meta. They were under that impression because it was largely the case. You see, in Overwatch, what makes heroes viable is not solely their current power level in regards to the latest patch. It mainly comes down to map design. High mobility heroes work well on high ground heavy maps. Long range heroes work great on maps that feature long sightlines. And AoE heavy heroes work great on choke point heavy maps. The problem that we were dealing with for the longest time was not only a lack of knowledge for these basic principles, because quite frankly the game never taught us any of them, but also the fact that balance patches objectively turned some heroes so incredibly powerful that they could overcome this basic map to hero balance relationship. Most people were running triple tank in season 3 because it was so incredibly powerful that you could make it work on pretty much every map. And pair that with our lack of knowledge for even basic principles like map to hero balance relationships, and suddenly we find ourselves in a situation where refusing to adhere to the meta puts us at a massive disadvantage. This is why, especially in higher ranks where knowing all these things should become second nature, it often feels like you lost in the hero selection screen already. Now, some people might say that the fix for that will be the introduction of a role selection queue where you sign up as whatever you want to play as prior to queuing up for a game. But it is my belief that you can only fix that by A, putting in actual effort to teach your player base when it comes to how the hell this game is supposed to be played, and B, react more swiftly to obviously oppressive meta trends. You see, most of the things that we once called broken actually made it into the game as a basic strategy. Triple tank, dive, quad tank, triple DPS, double sniper. The more balance patches we get, the more things turn broken. The more things are broken, the more things get tuned, and the more strategies we end up having at our disposal once these things have been tuned. Where triple tank was once the only way to play the game with a decent chance to win, it is now a strategy that can work under given circumstances. Where dive comps used to be be absolutely mandatory, they have now established themselves as a staple of basic strategy in Overwatch, period. The dev team has proven to us that they are capable of taking something inherently broken and tweaking it to the point where we can still run it without having it become an oppressive meta trend. And that is why I firmly believe that our current meta in Season 10, the one largely dominated by Brigitte and Hanzo, will eventually also reach one such status. Well, it is either that or it goes the way of the Beyblade meta that was actually completely broken. The problem is obviously that they are taking way too much time to implement these fixes. Mercy has been a must pick for about 6 months or so before she was hit with a number of obvious and mandatory nerfs, and that is just way too long. Now, there was a bit of an excursus on the evolution of meta play in Overwatch ever since its release of competitive play, and personally, I would argue that all of this basic knowledge adds a lot of context to the discussion that helps us argue against what Blizzard is telling us. You might be remembering their statements surrounding the implementation of a role queue system, saying something like, "This is not lining up with the spirit of Overwatch, where being able to swap to any hero you like is inherent." And I believe that we now have the ability to, at least kind of, disprove that. You see, when they say something like this, it really doesn't mean anything. The spirit of Overwatch can be anything that they want it to be, but that doesn't mean that the player base would agree with that. Even I snarkily tweeted out saying, "Jeff has a point, I would hate for the spirit of 4 DPS players arguing over who's the most useless to be ruined." Just because, well, for one, I was pretty salty about that statement, but also because it really doesn't mean anything in the grand scheme of things. Because reality is that the spirit of Overwatch is not our ability to swap to any hero we like. The spirit of Overwatch, from a community standpoint, is playing our favorite heroes as often as possible. Yes, there are compositions where slotting in different heroes other than your typical 2 DPS, 2 tanks, and 2 supports is necessary. But realistically, most players deliberately main very few heroes, and very often they are part of the same category. But where do we take that anecdotal evidence from that supposedly supports our argument? From the exact point of discussion that we covered in the beginning of this video. In large, you can split players into about 3 categories. Those who want to play meta because it simply gives them the best chance to win, in which case they already know what they want to play anyway. Players who don't care about the meta and rather play their favorite hero, in which case those players also know what they want to play already. And players who don't care either way, filling out whatever the team needs, in which case allowing them to specialize on one role could substantially improve their performance on few heroes over splitting their playtime on a variety of them. I think a lot of players would agree with the sentiment that most of us already know very well what we want to play at the time of queuing up. Sure, we might alter our choice depending on which map we are assigned to, but in large, most of us just want to play a handful of heroes most of the time. And that's simply because it makes sense. The way Overwatch was designed, combining so many different mechanics, it was made for us to find our favorite heroes. Even if you don't enjoy clicking heads, odds are that you will find at least one hero in Overwatch that you enjoy playing. So it's not only that most of us want to play just a handful of heroes at a time, it also benefits us because we can more easily improve on a roster of few heroes over flexing all over the place. And when it comes to this lack of flexibility that they like to point at as the obvious culprit explaining why they won't introduce a role queue, think again to how we are approaching this game. Those interested in maximizing their chances to win study the meta and learn to play whatever is beneficial at any given point in time. If a flex DPS has to learn how to play Brigitte because the flex DPS spot is usually playing that role to add to the standard double support roster, then those players are going to adapt to that meta. But if somebody doesn't care about the meta or actively tries to avoid participating in it, then they won't swap off of whatever hero they want to play anyway. So where do we really make cuts when it comes to flexibility? In the camp of players who learn what's necessary anyway, or those that wouldn't swap even when given the opportunity? This argument simply doesn't hold any water. And well, speaking of arguments that don't hold any water, it is obviously very easy for me to sit here poking holes in things that developers have said because they are not here trying to defend their choices. And I could also just be twisting facts, however I like to make it look like my points are foolproof. After all, everyone is usually trying to reinforce their own point of view anyway. And it's not like my points are based on more but anecdotal evidence. You know, I could have spent another 10 minutes talking about how that Mercy one trick might have a DPS account where they actually frag the hell out, so having them play Widowmaker is not automatically giving you a loss. Realistically, there are a lot of things that affect the outcome of your match. Somebody could be having a really good day and play much better than usual. Somebody on the enemy team could have a really bad day and play horrible. Maybe somebody's tilted, maybe they have an alt account where they play something else at a really high level. There are many factors. But when it comes to the player base, I don't think any of that really matters to them. You still have people call others a Hero X main when they don't even bother checking their profile for other seasons where they stacked hours on a bunch of other heroes. We only see what we want to see, and as I've already mentioned in the beginning, perceived problems can turn into very real ones very quickly. In summary, when players make the case that a role queue system would just flat out improve Overwatch in its core, and when Blizzard said that it would be against the very spirit of this game, I have to disagree with both of them. I do not believe that a role queue would magically get players to play the game properly, because for that to happen, the game itself needs to reinforce proper gameplay behavior over constantly rewarding us for doing the wrong things. It's the gamey nature of the SR system and a lack of tutorialization that is the issue here if you ask me. But on Blizzard's part, implementing a role queue would be anything but contrary to the spirit of this game. Most of us main very few heroes and we want to play them as often as possible. So I believe that adding a system like that would really just further it. At the end of the day, this is just the perspective of one of your players, Blizzard. And this goes out to all of you watching. Whether you agree or disagree, let your voice be heard down in the comment section below, because your opinion matters. Do you agree that adding a role queue would make sense, or do you think that it would really just make things worse? And if you do, why do you think so? None of us have to be experts to give our opinion, because ultimately, we as consumers have every right to have our voices be heard. And our feedback matters to the developers, so sound off down in the comment section below. But until then, this is me done for the day as I talk about the problem of feeling like losing in the hero selection screen already. Thank you everybody so much for watching. Don't forget to drop me a like on your way out if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you want to see more, and maybe share this video with a friend you think would find it interesting. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you all next time.